Hello friends, today we're going to discuss about social welfare schemes for section 8 to 15 for transgender persons under the Transgender Persons Act of 2019. I'm Dr. Suresh Badadmat, Professor of Psychiatry, Head of Telemedicine Center, Head of Forensic Psychiatry Unit at NIMANS, Bangalore. This presentation is for academic purpose only, not for legal opinion. If you want to have a legal opinion, please do contact an advocate. Conflict of interest? None. The Transgender Act of 2019 was passed on 5th December 2019 to provide protection of rights of persons with transgender and to provide social welfare schemes to transgender persons. And this legislation, the landmark legislation under the Constitution of India, and National Council of Transgender was passed on 21st August 2020. Basically, this council was constituted to provide and also advise the government with regard to transgender social welfare measures. At the same time, on 25th September 2020, rules also was notified. In the rules, the Annexure 2 clearly talks about suggested list of welfare schemes to be considered, which is actually mentioned in section 8 to 15 the state government. Now, let's discuss about the Annexure 2 of the rules. The welfare schemes which has been suggested under the rules from section 9 to 15 of the legislation, they are very clearly mentioned. There are 5 schemes have been notified under the rules. But however, they have a corresponding sections under the legislation. Access to health, which clearly been mentioned under the legislation section 14 and 15. Access to education under legislation section 13. Access to housing section 8 and 12. Welfare schemes, which is basically section 8 to 15. So there are various uh, legislation as mentioned, they have a rights. So correspondingly have been told in the rules also. And economic support for section 14 of the legislation. Now let's discuss these various schemes which have been notified under the rules Annexure 2. Access to health. Transgender person have to fight to get the access to health. Many transgender persons are not allowed into the government hospital and also to the private hospital. And the corporate hospital do not entertain them inside their premises. So the transgender person have to find people who are unqualified, quacks for their healthcare. This is blatant violation of their rights. Hence, this legislation clearly talks about access to healthcare. This is a wonderful move. The scheme has been to be formed under the state government. Access to health clearly talks about at least one government hospital in every state shall be equipped to offer medical intervention. The medical intervention includes hormonal therapy, sexual reassignment surgery, counseling, laser therapy, hair removal therapy, and various cosmetic surgery should be available for every transgender in every state. One hospital has to be notified, and also they should not be discriminated in the private hospital also. If they discriminate, there have been penalties which have been clearly dictated under the legislation. And also the medical insurance and Arogyashri cards to be provided. They cannot be discriminated and eliminated from the any health cards or health insurance. All healthcare facilities should ensure there are separate wards for transgender persons. Let's think about this. You have gone to various hospitals. Have you seen any transgender wards? No. That means our society has not been inclusive. This legislation clearly talks about every hospital should have a transgender wards. So that's a very important inclusion. Even in the schools or in the hostel, we don't have separate separate accommodation for this transgender people, and we have continued to discriminate them. So access to healthcare is very important for transgender person. Coming to access to education. Once the healthcare is done, now the issue is access to education. Many times, transgender, when they enter into the school or into the college, they are bullied. From the student to the teacher, even to the a person or a person who is working in the college. And this is a severe discrimination, violation against the persons with. Hence, please do not discriminate them and bully them in the education. As much we require education, they require education also. The theme clearly says scholarship for the transgender students, because once a person as a transgender is it comes out, the family usually throws them out of their family. That means they'll be removed or they'll be kicked out of the house. They are on street. Hence, they need support from the government to continue their education, and inclusive, equitable, quality education in school that fosters respect, equality, and gender diversity. Means gender sensitization has to be done. The teachers, the principal, the headmaster, every person in the education system needs to be sensitized about the gender issues. Also, protection against ragging, bullying, the commonest in any education is that needs to be stopped. And especially with the transgender, even the government provides the capacity, they provides the various scholarship. Unfortunately, the environment is not so conducive. They can go and access the education. Hence, the environment needs to be thought about and sensitized about the transgender people. Facilitation of accommodation, schooling for transgender children, residential government schools and universities to be fostered. Coming to access to housing, is again transgender person, when they want to hire a house or a rent, nobody wants to give. They are looked upon as a suspicious or an alien in our country. That should not happen. Access to housing, basically they also talked about affordable housing, shelter and community center for at-risk transgender youth that provide nutritious food and counseling, access to sanitation facilities and safe drinking water, which are a basic minimum human rights which needs to be given for the transgender. And this legislation, along with the rules which are notified, guarantees for the transgender person. Coming to the very essential part, welfare measures. Welfare measures like universal access to food security, because many a time the transgender persons, their name is in their original family where it is in their ration card. Unfortunately, when they come out of the house, they don't have ration card. Now, the transgender ID card and the transgender certificate should enable them to get the ration card, so that wherever they go, they should be able to get the food security. That is very essential. Once the transgender becomes old, they do not have children. Pension for aged, disabled, or other vulnerable transgender person be ensured. Old age and retirement homes of transgender person facing housing exclusion should be considered. Public transportation to have harassment-free zone for transgender person is very essential. Along with the economic support, the transgender person not given any kind of job, any employment, including government, considers them as an alien. Hence, they resort to begging or else sexual worker they do. That's an unfortunate. So, this legislation says that economic support to be given, like universal coverage of life insurance to be provided, access to banking and financial services, including loans to be given to the transgender person. Explicit inclusion of transgender person in employment guarantee schemes such as Manrega, very essential. All security, social security schemes to be provided. Formation to self-help groups for livelihood activities is essential, and provision of zero interest and other microfinance scheme to be given the transgender persons. These are the various social schemes have been notified under the rules, and the state needs to take it up and provide the rights of the transgender and promote them and uphold them. This legislation is a first step for the mainstream for the rights of the transgender. However, still there is a long way to go. This is the first step. After many centuries, we have extended our hand to protect, promote, prevent the use of human rights violation of the transgender. Thank you very much for giving your valuable time. Stay safe.